Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you tonight. My name is Shauna McCabe, and I'm the director of the Art Gallery of Guelph, who is hosting this event tonight. I'd like to welcome you all and offer a land acknowledgement to start. The statement is critical for cultural institutions as it recognizes the history and the ongoing impacts of colonialism, as well as the historical complicity of arts and heritage institutions through their approaches to the representation of difference. And these images and narratives have quite a significant authority in the public sphere. Typically, a land acknowledgement recognizes the traditional ownership of the lands upon which an event is held. But as we are all gathered virtually today, connected and yet physically dispersed across borders, it's a good moment to reflect on the significance of place wherever we are and how the different traditional lands that we reside in and move through inform our lives. We respect the significance of treaties that continue to affirm the inherent sovereignty of Indigenous nations and recognize a responsibility for the stewardship of the lands on which we live, work, and create. I'm very pleased to be speaking with Ken Lum and Jon Tupper tonight, two of my colleagues and who are also good friends. They've known each other for quite some time. A note to everyone who's joining us, we do have everyone on mute, and if you have questions as we go, you can just input them into the chat area, and we'll follow up with those towards the end of the evening. It seemed important to have this conversation as we close this quite tremendous year, one filled with new thinking about history and memory, and calls to action to address the voids and absences in public history around the world. This series actually we began the day before Election Day in the United States with a conversation with Nina Kachadorian about her project and installation called Monument to the Unelected. And we've been looking at varying issues and ideas related to monuments and the monumental landscape. First, to introduce our guests. So first, Ken, although he's currently based in Philadelphia, Ken is a Canadian artist known for his multidisciplinary art practice that spans painting, sculpture, installation, and photography. A longtime professor, he is currently the Marilyn Jordan Taylor Presidential Professor and Chair of the Department of Fine Arts at the University of Pennsylvania, Stuart Weitzman School of Design. From 2000 to 2006, he was head of the graduate program in studio art at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, where he taught from 1990 until 2006. He then joined the faculty of Bard College in 2005 and worked there until 2007. And he's been a visiting professor for numerous institutions internationally. He's the co-founder and founding editor of Yishu Journal of Contemporary Chinese Art. He was the project manager for Okwia Nwezor's The Short Century, Independence and Liberation Movements in Africa, 1945 to 1994. That was in 2001. He was also co-curator of the 7th Sharjah Biennial in 2005 and Shanghai Modern in 2005. He's exhibited widely, including the Sao Paulo Biennial, Shanghai Biennale, Documenta 11, the Istanbul Biennial, Guangzhou Biennial, Moscow Biennial, and Whitney Biennial in 2014. He's published many essays on art and collected recently in a wonderfully titled book, Everything is Relevant. Everything is Relevant, and that's really a philosophical stance that is clear through all of Ken's work. He's also realized permanent public art commissions and temporary installations in cities including Vienna, Vancouver, Utrecht, St. Moritz, Toronto, and St. Louis. In thinking about this talk tonight, I invited my colleague Jon Tupper to be part of this, as Jon and Ken have a long history. Jon curated Ken's project Photo Mirrors while director of the Walter Phillips Gallery at the Banff Center, presenting it at the Sao Paulo Biennial that year as Ken Lum was representing Canada. Jon is the director of the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, formerly director of the Confederation Center Art Gallery, as well as the Walter Phillips Gallery and Plug-in Gallery in Winnipeg. Before I turn it over to Ken to talk about Monument Lab, I wanted to just show you a few images of his past work, just to introduce you to his art practice So you can get a sense of the trajectory that brings him to Monument Lab today. So these are some of your earlier work, Ken. This is, I know, sort of one of a beloved piece. And this was installed in 1990 at Wit to Wit. Melisha hates her job, and really highlights kind of your interest in signage and graphic design. And that actually.
Well, sorry to interrupt, Shauna, but it should be known that the Wit to Wit Gallery museum, I should say, will no longer be called the Wit to Wit Museum, but will be called the Melly Kunst Institute, changing the name to the name of the work. Because Wit to Wit is the name of Cornelius Wit to Wit, was a worked for the Dutch East India Company and was engaged in slave trade.
Okay. So is the name change happening now?
It's happening towards the third week or just before the fourth week of January.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. And this was a series even before that. And so signage and graphic design has been a long time focus of your work. 1989 portrait logo series. The Rorschach sign series from, this is later 2008. Strip mall series, 2009. These are some of my favorites. Monument to East Vancouver from 2010. So beginning to work in installation. From Shangri-La to Shangri-La, 2010 as well. This is actually the structures. The house actually references the homes in North Vancouver on the mud flats. I-70 installation from Missouri in 2015. Memorial to the Battle of Germantown, Peace Through Valor, 2016, and this is in Nathan Phillips Square in Toronto. And that's it. I'll stop sharing here. While in Philadelphia, Ken co-founded Monument Lab with Paul Farber. And Monument Lab is a public art and history studio designed to generate new ways of thinking about monuments and public art, as well as to find new critical perspectives to reflect on the monuments we have inherited and to imagine those we have yet to build. And focused initially on Philadelphia, its mandate has been broadening recently, which I know Ken will tell us about. So do you want to share your screen? You might need to unmute.
Okay, sorry.
There we go.
Start that again. Thanks very much for the very kind introduction, Shauna, and it's wonderful to meet you. And but also for me, particularly affecting to meet my dear friend Jon Tupper, who I've known since the beginning of my art career, virtually. So it's great to be reacquainted. Monument Lab started in 2012. It started in the year I moved to Philadelphia. It was a city I was completely new to. I'd visited once before when as a teenager, but that was about it. But didn't know much about it. And once I moved there to work at the University of Pennsylvania, I was very interested in noting all the markers and signage and historical signage and the statuary that I was encountering throughout the city. There's over 1,000 official statues in the city because it's a city that's over 450 years old. And so I happened to live very near the Billie Holiday house, right? Billie Holiday is a great jazz singer who obviously died tragically and so on. And so I read this and I took a great interest in this. And as I started to walk around Philadelphia, in fact, on the same day, I encountered this statue of John Wallamaker, a distinguished citizen who had a namesake department store called Wallamaker's. He was the inventor of the sales tag, and I also never heard of him before. And not that he's not deserving of recognition, but this statue is actually sited on the skirt, on the apron of City Hall itself. So, you know, hallowed ground for the city. And I started thinking, well, surely there must be a statue of Billie Holiday. And subsequently, I found out there was no statue of Billie Holiday. And I thought, wow, okay. I started thinking about the unevenness of the system of representation borne out by the monuments of Philadelphia. Who gets represented, who doesn't, who gets, and of course, it's a reflection of power and prestige. You know, as many of you know, the soul of Philadelphia is African-American. There's about 43% population is African-American. It used to be even closer to 55. But because of the last 20 years of, gentrification and so on, and a lot of New Yorkers who can't afford New York moving to Philadelphia, it's only an hour by train to New York, the African-American population has been declining. And of course, Philadelphia has a great history of African-Americans, from Marian Anderson to John Coltrane, to Duke Ellington and Count Basie playing there. The Sound of Philadelphia, Three Degrees, Harold Melvin, the Blue Notes. You can just go on and on. And so that became a kind of endless source of almost like a game for me. I started trying to map it out, not just cognitively, but actually map it out on my computer. Who wasn't included, who deserves to be included, and so on. And then just to underline that point, there's a movie called Rocky, which was very popular and which culminates in the Rocky climbing up to the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art and kind of saluting his city. And Sylvester Stallone donated this bronze of Rocky Balboa, and it was sited on top of the steps, which is controlled by the city. It's not part of the museum, oddly enough. And it was recognized for, and it's still there. It's the only official statue of a boxer that's owned by the city. Now, the curious thing is that Philadelphia does have a real heavyweight champion boxer, Smokin' Joe Frazier, who actually beat Muhammad Ali in one of the three epic fights. So this was in 2015, and NBC Comcast, which is owned by, it's a Comcast company which is owned, headquartered in Philadelphia, commissioned this. There's an injustice and commissioned this statue of Joe Frazier. The difference is that this is on private property. It was a private commission. So to this day, there's no official recognition of Joe Frazier, at least in terms of civic space. And so these sorts of things were kind of percolating, and I started thinking about, and as Shauna alluded to, I'm very interested in this division between public and private space anyways. And I met Paul Farber, who was teaching in urban studies at the university very early on at Penn. And we both realized we were teaching very similar courses, or at least asking very similar questions, and about the distribution of power, and obviously questions of inequity and social justice and so on. And we started riffing on the idea there should be an exhibition on this. And he came up with the idea to, we should do an exhibition and maybe do it in a gallery and so on. And I'd done, citywide exhibitions. And so I said, no, this is too big. This needs to be citywide. And that's how Monument Lab was born. We just started, doing it. And, but one thing about the United States is that, and it's very paradoxical. I think most Canadians know this, is that on the one hand, you have, terrible deep skepticism of government. On the other hand, and so that results in the privatization of schools, creates a school price crisis. There's a healthcare crisis, obviously undergirded by the coronavirus. But it's also still a place where if you have an idea and you go up to certain, foundations, you can get a lot of money to do projects in a real hurry. And so I made a proposal to the Pew Foundation, which is a huge foundation. And they said, well, we don't trust that, it would be successful yet in terms of the city, because that would be, a multi-million-dollar project. And so we'll give you a smaller sum, and it turned out to be $300,000 to do an iteration, kind of template, a smaller version of the citywide exhibition in 2015 and 2017, because of the success of the one iteration, which was held in this courtyard of City Hall, and it became very, very popular. 300,000 people came to see it. They said, we trust you to have this. And then and they provided us with, Paul and I, $1.2 million. And then the Penn Foundation said, we'll cover another $1.5 million. And next thing you know, we had almost, $2.5 million to do the show in a very short time. And so on. But we had to make a pitch. I had to write an essay and present ourselves and our idea. And so this is just the we collaborated with the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. That's where Thomas Eakins taught. Winslow Homer was there. John Singer Sargent. It's a very storied art school with these kind of amazing American painters. And so I'm just going to run through the exhibition, but also some of the issues which we raised. And I could just say, maybe I'll just read one paragraph from our statement. Philadelphia is a city full of monuments and memorials. Philadelphia is also a city full of monumental histories, many of which are little known, obscured, or simply unacknowledged. These underrepresented histories often exist in tension with officially acknowledged narratives. The projects that make up Monument Lab address issues of social justice and solidarity, including matters of race, gender, sexuality, class, and national belonging. The monuments proposed through this exhibition are made of stone and bronze, as well as recycled materials, images, sounds, and the byproducts of community process. And I'm just showing you this, that I should have had the image earlier. This is of the great Black educator Octavius Cattle, who was advancing the right, encouraging African Americans in Philadelphia to vote in the state and presidential elections, and for that he was shot dead by a racist in South Philadelphia. And this was in 2017, and it's the first officially sanctioned statue of a full-figure statue of an African American in Philadelphia. It's the only one to this day, right? There are figures of African American full-figured statues in Philadelphia, but they tend to be of somewhat problematic, like they're holding up the columns or the roof ceiling of the city hall and so on. So they represent kind of racial types as opposed to an actual historical figure. And so this is our process in which we worked out. We didn't want the exhibition to be simply a biennial, where we, like a documenta or a biennial where, artists make site-specific work and so on. We wanted it not just to be an art exhibition, but to be a process of democratic input. We knew we wanted data. We knew we wanted the involvement of neighborhoods. We wanted genuine dialogue, not just cursory dialogue, as so many shows have this very cursory and temporal relationship to neighborhoods. So our process was to question, dig into research about statue, site, or public space. And that meant writing about the iconography, the hidden histories, the provenance of various reviews and opinions about the statue. And it's amazing how little is actually compiled for so many of these officially sanctioned statues. So we questioned, dig into research about statue, site, or public space. We connected, meaning organized and exchanged ideas with stakeholders and invested in places of memory. And that means exchanging ideas with the local citizens in a neighborhood in which a monument would be sited, a provisional monument would be sited as part of the Monument Lab exhibition. And we discovered very early on that local citizenry know their neighborhoods and know, and we discount the knowledge that they bring to bear at our peril. You know, they would know, and we didn't judge and evaluate the importance of what they knew. For example, we would talk to some people and they'd say, well, that field there was owned by Mr. Brown, and before Mr. Brown was this nice couple and so on. And we thought that was of value too. So we didn't see anything not of value. We wanted to be as open as possible. We didn't have certain expectations beforehand when we met with people. We also wanted in our process to redefine the conversation about the past, present, and future monuments. And our process involved a prototype, what we call the prototype monument. Here behind the text here is Sharon Hayes' work, If They Should Ask, which is a compendium of various plinths and bases for statues of male figures in Philadelphia, and then etched into the base are names of women, significant women Philadelphians who perhaps are also deserving of representation officially. So, and lastly, we wanted to report, share our findings, reflections, and offer new directions for monuments, which I will describe in a little bit. The exhibition took place in pretty well every sector of the city. We really thought it was really important to have Philadelphians or visitors to Monument Lab know their city in a bodily way by actually visiting many, many areas of the city, including some of the worst neighborhoods in the city. There's actually two missing here further up on the cursor. And the region up here where my cursor is a very, very, very poor area. I would say very dangerous at night. You wouldn't want to go there after dark and so on. But we felt it was very important to, because they are Philadelphians too. They just happen to be very, very poor and so on. And we insisted on that. And, you know, some people said good luck on that, but it really worked. We had buses, people went up there. And many of the people in these neighborhoods at first were very skeptical of why we were there. They said, the city has never cared about us. The city has never heeded our call for anything. And so we had a lot of meetings. We had dance parties, we had music, we had events where we always brought food for, free food for a lot of people, hundreds of families, in fact, and so on. And over time, we were embraced by the neighborhoods. And this is the hub at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And each of the images here is an image from work of a prototype monument in the various parts of the city. And the black and white is a map of Philadelphia. And this is a work by a monument to the new immigrant by the great Cuban artist, Tania Bruguera. And what she did was, and this is what we call a prototype monument. It's a monument which has a base that says monument to the new immigrant. It's unfired plaster. There's a little simple wooden wire armature underneath, but because it's unfired and because the exhibition was taking place in late summer, over time, it started to crack and come apart. And so that by the end of the exhibition, all you had was basically the armature. And she also eccentrically shaved off the face. She didn't want it to be identified racially or defined by a type. And it's just of a child with a teddy bear. And this was another work by Karen Olivier. The battle was joined in Vernon Park, which is a historically African-American neighborhood. And there's a monument underneath here, the Battle of Germantown. This is Germantown originally was a German enclave, not enclave, but a German, ethnic German neighborhood. And she concealed it with mirrors, and it became quite beautiful because, it actually disappears visually, and you actually see, you get confused between where the foliage ends and so on. And it became very, very popular. People, every time there's scuff marks on it, there's two people of the neighborhood would go there and start polishing it and so on. And became quite loved. In addition to every site, and you can see behind here, there's the Karen Olivier piece. You can see it with my cursor here. But beside it, or in proximity to it, would be a Monument Lab container. And the Monument Lab container is where visitors who pass by, we would actually pay for students and young people to ask visitors, hi, can we talk to you about Monument Lab? And then we would try to seek their input to the question of what would be an appropriate monument for the city of Philadelphia at this moment in 2017, right? We didn't tell them, we didn't say ideal, we didn't say, give a budget, we didn't give any qualifiers. We just said what would be an appropriate monument. And we had over 200,000 respondents to this. And I'll speak about the data assessment later on. And very often we would have events that took place where all the leaves are, for example. We would have events, often scheduling talks with, including the mayor and also a Philadelphia Eagles linebacker, the police chief, the poet laureate, and so on. We have these events in these areas where normally we would never have official events because they were either poor or they were, slightly neglected areas. And so, this is the idea, expanding the pedestal. We quote from Karen Olivier here, monuments are about people, they're about humanity, or they should be. They should reflect our humility and humbleness, the complexity of what it means to be human. So find a monument that depicts a person. In the circles above, write down some of the people who would have made this person's work possible. Anyone who might have been associated with them, took care of them, collaborated with them, or on whom they depended. Ask at least one person to help you add to the list. So these were the sorts of data prompts that we would put forward to the public. And we would also ask, the public using an old-fashioned Sharpie pen on a clipboard, what is an appropriate monument for the current city of Philadelphia? And then we only asked, where would you place the monument? What's the name of your monument? What is your name? What zip code do you live in? Which neighborhood of Philadelphia or the suburbs do you live in? Can you give us a sketch? And so on. And then we would start typologizing the monuments according to how many said statuary form, how many said ethereal form, how many didn't offer a monument and just said no monuments, we just need better schools. Like we counted everything as a possible monument. And we involved a lot of neighborhood children. So this is King Britt. I don't know if you know him. He's kind of fantastic electronic musician, King Britt, and he was teaching these kids how to make music, how to make electronic music, and they were, he's a kind of a star in his area, and so everyone's really excited and so on. So we sponsored all these types of events. Literally, I can't tell you how many events we sponsored, and I would, so the logistics was unbelievable. Oh, here's the Tony Bruguera again. And this is by a Canadian great artist, Dwayne Linklater, who was actually in my class at the Banff Center. And so, I thought this kid, is so talented and so on. And I've been a big fan of his, and he just needed a break, and anyways, he came up with this beautiful piece. It's a nocturnal piece. It's in neon. It's at Penn Treaty Park. Philadelphia was founded by William Penn. And at the site of this treaty called the Penn Treaty, he signed, William Penn signed a peace treaty with the Lenape chief, Chief Tamminen. And of course, Chief Tamminen didn't write English, and so we have to take William Penn's words for it. But he wrote down that our friendship and our trust will endure as long as the creeks and rivers flow and the sun, moon, and stars endure. So it's a very moving piece because, of course, the Lenape were betrayed, like many native tribes and nations were betrayed. And so that's where it's poignant, and it's a beautiful, beautiful work. And the script is actually done in the handwriting of Dwayne's daughter. And this is another very beautiful piece by Kaylee. I just forget her name now. She's gonna kill me if she's on. But anyways, and what Philadelphia is known as a city of masonry because there's a lot of brick town row houses. And if you've been to Philadelphia, you know they're famous for the front stoops, these kind of steps in stone and brick. And people would sit in front of them and talk to the neighborhood, talk to their neighbors. And what we did here was in Washington Square Park, because it's actually it's part of the national park system. And so we contacted the national park system, and we asked whether we could remove the public benches there and install these stoops. That took endless amounts of work to get permission, and thank God we did. And it was so well used. There's many more on the other side which you don't see. They were so well used that by the time of the end of Monument Lab, people were writing in and calling into the National Parks Board and asking whether the stoops could not be retained, at least for this passageway of the park, because it was just very touching in terms of the reference. And these stoops also are affecting because they were recovered from demolition yards because the city is undergoing rapid renovation. It's population growth and after decades of decline, but just prior to the 2000s to today, there's been an incredible boom in terms of the population and building, and many of these older row houses are being torn down to build newer homes, and the newer ones won't have stoops and so on. I'll just keep going. People did performances on them, for example. And I showed you Sharon Hayes' piece. And this is Mel Chin's piece. We also insisted that we wanted about half the artists invited to Monument Lab. There's about 30 that did performances and another dozen that did prototype monuments. We wanted about half the artists to be from Philadelphia or the Philadelphia region, right? And we thought that was important. We also thought that it was very important that, more than half were artists of color and diversity to reflect the composition of the city itself. And this is by the great Chinese American artist Mel Chin, and it's called To Me. And it's a wordplay, of course. It's T-O-M-E, but it's also T-W-O-M-E, and everyone gets a chance to come up these long walkways and to become a celebrity, to become me, and people were standing on them taking selfies and so on. But here you see someone, reading out a protest note. We also had an old lady wheel herself up. Someone helped her be wheeled into, and then she actually pushed herself off. I should have maybe included the picture, and stood up, and people were cheering her and so on. It became super, super popular, especially from around close to noon to about 4 p.m. and so on. People just were reading poetry. Some people were singing and so on. And we had these events all over the city. This is by Olafur Emeka and Emeka Ogbo, a great Nigerian artist. And it was a sound installation on top of the Philadelphia Public Library and so on. So events would be taking place, and then we would just send out on social media, there's an event taking place tonight, and so on. And again, here's Hank Willis Thomas here. I forget who this is. And we just had a lot of events for talking about the city, and people really became engaged in a theorization and appreciation of the complexity of history, of the city. We had these kind of platforms in many of the areas of the city, and we would always have, you know, at least, I think on the worst day we had about 30 people, and that was a rainy day. But generally it was like several hundred at times, and so on, like the Philadelphia Eagles linebacker that was popular, and so on. We would ask them, what's it like in Philadelphia? What do you think is wrong with the city, right? So that in a way was even more important than the art, so, you know, for Monument Lab. And that's why I think it registered so deeply with so many people. And Hank Willis Thomas's, you know, great power to the all people, which is a Black Panthers slogan of a giant Afro pick, right? And this was done in proximity to a statue of former Mayor Rizzo, who was a real racist in his time in the 1970s and 80s. And the report to the city, we came up with a little booklet. In fact, wrote another essay, Paul wrote another essay, and this is just give you an idea in terms of some of the data we had. 12 proposed monuments to abolitionists, 35 proposed monuments to the MOVE bombing. Now, MOVE bombing is something which the city only recently, it happened in 1985, more than a dozen people killed, you know, 6 square blocks of the city razed by fire, and only recently did the city apologize because of the Walter Wallace killing, which is coincidentally took place very close to where the MOVE bombing was originally, and so on. So all this data, and then we would try to analyze the data, and you can see here, I hope you can see it, this is sculptural form, this is interactive form, these are just pages inside the report, and so on. And then all the dots are where the respondents are from, the zip codes, the most common topics by residents of city areas. We tried every permutation of data presentation. And in the end, we came out with rather than a catalog, we came up with a book called Monument Lab, Creative Speculations for Philadelphia. We invited leading scholars such as Kirk Savage, who's written kind of amazing books on Confederate monuments and so on, to contribute essays. David Brownlee, who is a distinguished architectural historian. So it was quite heavy in terms of academics, but it was also, you know, a testament to the importance of knowledge production, which we were seeking. And more recently, we've been branching out into many other cities. We are also branching out into Europe. We've got projects in Munich, we've got projects in Antwerp, a project in Amsterdam, and so on. And we've been, since the exhibition, we have been working on projects in Los Angeles, Newark, Memphis, New Orleans, St. Louis, Chicago, Baltimore, Cleveland, Portland, Oregon, Los Angeles, and another, you know, dozen American cities, Toronto, and also Vancouver contacted us as well. And so we asked the same question: how would you map the monuments of St. Louis? And we were gathering all the data and so on. We think it's really important to have a kind of publication arm accompanying this that's user friendly, that is not you know, overloaded with complex language and so on. And so I kind of showed you this earlier, but these were the sorts of things, layers of the past, 10 years ago, what was here, 50 years ago, 100 years, 400 years, right? So a methodology for kids and adults to confront history. And very recently, we, the Mellon Foundation, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, launched a $200 million initiative to, you know, for new monuments during this moment of monuments reckoning. And they wanted, and we were the test case. Monument Lab was cited by the Mellon Foundation as the most relevant organization dealing with this. We were covered in the New York Times that said that we had the most relevant Instagram website of any other NGO at this moment in time. And they awarded us $4 million US to work on this. And we've just been contacted very recently, in fact, last week by the George Soros Foundation and so on. So we've become quite big already, and we've have a fellows program and so on. And it all started with, a little conversation I had with Paul in 2012. I just want to come to a conclusion here and say that we also have a Monument Lab studio. We made a proposal to Richmond, Virginia, in terms of what to do with the Confederate monuments on Monument Avenue, which are four Confederate generals on horses. And this one is they're removing Stonewall Jackson. And so our idea was to not remove it yet, but to impart, play with it. And we had the idea that each of the generals would be in the midst of a equestrian accident. And this is just one example, Stonewall Jackson flying off his horse, right? So we're always kind of playing off these ideas of, what sort of creative responses can we carry out before removal. And we think it's very important to have some dialogue before it gets removal. I think the worst thing, maybe not the worst thing, but not a good thing would be just to remove something in the stealth of night, no dialogue, and then next morning you wake up and the problematic monument is removed and there's no dialogue. And I'll end it with this one, because it goes to the heart of what we're very interested in Monument Lab. I'm using this because it's also a Canadian example in Queenston Heights, the General Isaac Brock Memorial, the column, 57 meters tall of limestone, very typical, heroic, and General Brock is standing atop this column, and as many of you know, he was heroic in the Battle of 1812, but as many of you will probably, I hope, also know, he even when he was dying, he said, there needs to be equal acknowledgement of his friend Chief Tecumseh, for which the battle would not have been won without the wiliness of Chief Tecumseh. And of course, when the war ended, there was talks about recognition of General Brock, but Chief Tecumseh was all but forgotten. And so this was erected about 1856 or something like that, more than 40 years after the War of 1812, and there was no recognition to this day of Chief Tecumseh. Now, if you look at my cursor here at the very bottom, that was put up by, we presume, Native First Nations people to honor Chief Tecumseh. And there's actually a little picture of Chief Tecumseh right here. It was put up in the mid-1980s. Nobody really knows who put it up. It would fall down and become weathered, and then it would be replaced. Initially, it was removed a few times by the parks superintendents, I guess, and then it would be put up again. And now it's recognized as the Chief Tecumseh Monument. And I'll show you another picture. And what we're very interested in is how this highly provisional, highly vulnerable monument made up of twigs and ribbons and such speaks truth to power in terms of First Nation status relative to white status, and how this very modest triangulated piece of work actually subsumes the energy of the almost 200 feet tall Isaac Brock monument. So I'll just conclude it with that, and thanks very much.
Thanks, Ken. That was great. One of the things I really love about your work is, as somebody who works in a museum all their life, is the fact that regular folks that may not know a lot about contemporary art really get the work itself. But just before I talk about your work specifically, I wanted to just carry on a little about this whole notion of removal of monuments. And because we had an issue here in Victoria where it was a statue of John A. Macdonald at City Hall, and he has a very tenuous connection to the city. He was never here, even though he was a member of Parliament from Victoria. but it was removed and taken away. And it seemed, the action of removal seemed to coalesce a lot of kind of very scary right-wing people to get together and complain about the destruction of that history. I wonder if you could talk just a little bit more about that whole notion of removal.
Well, as I alluded to, I don't think removal should take place before there's actually input from creative types, from thinkers, from intellectuals, and from public dialogue. I think there has to be that, right? But I also think that you know, there's a lot of statues that deserve to be removed. I'm not saying they don't deserve to remove, because they are an affront to all kinds of people. I mean, look at the Gassy Jack statue in Vancouver, which I think most Canadians know about, right? He was a pedophile. He was abusive to mostly Native women, and so on, right? And so he deserves to be removed, right? And yet you have these people that say, well, you know, a monument, they feel like their entire cosmology is threatened because they're not willing to, you know, accept change, right? Because things are very good. And unfortunately, I don't have a real good answer to that. I think when, you know, you're going to have these kind of, you know, these kind of reactionary responses, no matter what. But I think there has to be as inclusive and wide a dialogue before that point. I think the danger is not so much even the reactionary groups. Of course, they're dangerous, but maybe the you know, great section in the middle that can be persuaded by the argument of the reactionary groups. And that's why I think it's really a challenge, but I think it's really important to have dialogue in terms of what really did happen. What does Christopher Columbus really embody? For example, Christopher Columbus, by his second voyage, had enslaved 400 Native Americans, I guess I call them Native people, by his second voyage, right? And why did he take on the task? He took on the task for money, right? And who was the sponsor of Christopher Columbus? It was Ferdinand and Isabella. And who were Ferdinand and Isabella? Well, they were the prosecutors of a thing called the Spanish Inquisition, where literally millions of Native people died in Central and South America, right? So I think these sorts of things need to be explicitly announced, and I think too many people don't know much about the histories. I think if they did, they would. Knowing more about the history is actually enriching. You actually, you know, it's actually, you appreciate things even more, right? And so it doesn't make sense to me why people would be so afraid of knowing more.
I guess I'll follow up. You know, I guess to me, what's so interesting about Monument Lab is that artists are at the heart of it. And artists, you know, when so much of the project is about creative speculation, right? And sort of imagining alternatives. And that's been such a, you know, it's a longstanding part of architectural projects, but not so much when we think about art practice. Can you talk about how you see that creative speculation in relationship to the transformation of public landscapes? And especially as Monument Lab kind of, you know, begins to work at this national level, you know, how you already, like Philadelphia was, you can even tell from the images how kind of complex the project was, right? And how many layers. How do you do that? How do you sort of scale up to a national level with with artists at the heart of it?
Right. Well, artists are well, I would say the esprit of art is at the heart of it. Maybe not necessarily artists, because Paul Farber is an academic. But Paul Farber is an academic who thinks like an artist, and maybe this is not the right way to put it, but I'm an artist who kind of thinks often academically as well, right? Because I write and you know, in jury publications and so on. And so creative speculation just means you know, not being so fixated on the rules of what constitutes a monument, right? What constitutes a monument is to, you know, the idea that it projects consensus in terms of the narrative, that you can't, and it's also indisputable. The consensus is that this person who's represented surely is important, and we cannot dispute the importance, and we cannot dispute even question the values embodied by this statue, right? And that the values are eternal, and there's some sense of permanence to them, right? And the consensus, of course, is singular, right? Failing to recognize the multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-class, multi-whatever distinctions that make up any public corpus, right? And so creative speculations is about teasing out that very confined, fixed idea of a monument, to speculate on, well, what other forms can it take? And also test out those other forms to see how effective they are, right? And so on, rather than to just go into a kind of default mode of assuming that, you know, this is what a monument is. It has to be in marble, it has to be in bronze, and so on. By the way, one of the things about you know, the idea of a permanence for monuments is actually a fiction. The permanence of monument is only projected as permanent because there's so much administration and so much capital put into maintaining them, right? If it's a bronze statue, even a marble statue, that would corrode if you didn't clean it twice a year, at least. If you didn't make sure that the weep holes weren't properly still there and not plugged, and so on. So, you know, we tend to think of this idea of permanence only because it always looks permanent, but that's actually a kind of a, you know, a function of you know, of civic you know, desire to put capital into and muscle into maintaining it.
You meant there was a talk I think you gave last January. I saw a reference to the title was The Trouble with Monuments. And I was thinking about, you know, you mentioned this period of like monument reckoning that's taken place this year. You know, and I guess, you know, one of the things we kind of forget even the history before this period, but, you know, the kind of thinking about conversations about monuments and colonialism and racism and erasure have been going on, you know, for some time. I'm wondering, just given the last, you know, 8 months, has it changed your thinking about the trouble with monuments?
No, it's on. I would say it's affirmed our thinking because, you know, we started Monument in 2012, and we were already, you know, doing all kinds of smaller projects, which I didn't get into here. We had some smaller bits of funding. We're doing all kinds of little experiments in the city, and before the kind of more fully fledged version of Monument Lab, and you know, by the time, so we were starting to get recognized, and people were going, wow, when this monuments moment came about in the past year and a half, people said, wow, you guys are so prescient. How did you know, right? And Paul and I laugh about this all the time because we said to each other, we thought we were late, right? And I would say the only thing we did that was different was that we formalized a, you know, a kind of a entity of an episteme generating entity that was centered on and focused on, you know, the comportment of monuments, the operations of monuments, and tying it to questions of power and the uneven application of power, and in terms of the question of who's seen, who's not seen, who's heard, who's not heard. So that's what we did. We formalized that, and no one had ever done that before. Like we now have probably about 2,000 people in Monument Lab.
Ken, I wanted to talk a little about some of your work. Your work, and we started off with that image of the Hnatyshyn piece, and it was installed on the exterior of the building when you showed it in 1989, and it was there for several years, and then they took it down to clean it, and there was people complaining that the piece was missing. Did that surprise you?
Yeah, no. Well, it was put up in 1990 to coincide with my exhibition at the Wit the Wit, right? The first iteration was at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, as you may remember. And then, and the idea was that it was a former, there's a kind of laneway on the side of the building, and there used to be an advertising billboard on the side, right? And so they kept the frame for the billboard, right? But of course, no, but they didn't want it to serve for the purposes of advertising. And so they approached me just, when I arrived in Rotterdam. They said, we decided to keep this frame here that used to have a billboard, and we're going to just announce the show, right? And so, and they even showed me the layout, and they said, we just need an image in the background. They'll say your name, the dates, and when the special talks will be, and so on, right? And I said, sure, that's great, right? And then it would coincide with the length of the show. It would come down, and the next artist showing would have, a new poster up. For whatever reasons, I have no idea why, but for whatever reasons, I woke up the next day. I walked to the museum. We were still installing, and then I said, how about just an image of work without any of the other information, right? And they said, which one? And I said, Hnatyshyn hates her job. It wasn't like I had any plans. I just said that. And they thought it over, and they said, sure, fine. And then when the exhibition came down, so it wasn't years, but when the exhibition came down 3 months later, they took down the billboard, right? As I expected them to. I was already back in Canada. And 2 weeks later, after it came down, I received a call from the Witte de Witte, right? Soon to be called the Melly Kunst Institute, Art Institute. And they said, there's been an uproar here. Citizens in the vicinity of Witte de Witte are demanding that the billboard be put back up. I said, really? Why is this? It was just so strange, right? And then he said, well, the best way I can put it is that one lady said, every city deserves a monument to people who hate their jobs, right? And so, and I'm not making this up, right? It's too delicious. I don't have that type of imagination. And so they said, we think we should put it back up. And I said, great. I remember being totally thrilled by it. And it's been up since, right? And it's become, an immense kind of selfie site, hundreds of Flickr, pages, Facebook group, Hnatyshyn hates her job group, and so on. And it's been for many years one of the asterisks in terms of things to see in Rotterdam, which is the Rotterdam Tourist Board, which is I'm really proud of and happy about, but it had nothing, I certainly didn't anticipate it. And now with the what makes it very delicious is that, as I mentioned earlier, the Witte de Witte, the museum was named after Witte de Witte only because it's on Witte de Witte Straat, meaning it's on Witte de Witte Street. It was because at that time in 1990, it was actually a less than desirable area of the city. It was also seen as a little bit far. Of course, nowadays it's in the middle. It's like hipsterville, and so on. And so what happened was, with this monument reckoning, there was a movement to rename Witte de Witte because Witte de Witte was engaged in practice of slave trading through the company he worked for, which was East India, the Dutch East India Company. And after 2 years of input with the citizens and stuff, they called me up. And I had no input on this, by the way. They said, is it okay the city wants to rename the museum the Melly Art Institute. So it's a kind of a cherry on top in terms of my interest in monuments.
Is that John and I were talking about how there's like definitely a through line from this earlier work to what you're doing now. And when you look at that work, which did become sort of a monument or anti-monument, and even the work that's, like the strip mall signage, for example, strip mall series, do you think about those signs even as in terms of like monuments? You might not have at the time, but how do you think?
Well, I don't think about them as monuments, but I do think about what I'm really interested in is I could look at a very problematic monument. For example, I could look at a monument of Ryerson, right? Ryerson's like a proponent of residential schools, Ryerson University, right? And I can look at the negative histories associated with his depiction. So I'm interested in looking at the kind of negative spaces. I'm talking about the dark negative spaces. That's discernible, but maybe not apparent there. And that's something I've always been interested in my art. So like I'm always interested in the kind of how subjectivity deeper down can be gleaned from like shopkeeper signs, and how it has to be somehow reconciled or maybe not with public decorum and so on. And in a way, that's the same kind of issue of comportment that I find with public statuary.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could. Can I just quickly share my screen again and show you two more works, because I not these, but I just want to show you sorry. So here you see, so this is, it's not a monument, it's totally fictitious. This is like 3 meters wide, so it's quite very big. It's a fake sign, so to speak, but it's also real, and this is what I'm interested in. So Mepo Falls Town Center Plaza, largest shopping center in the Northlands, and then it's like this town is dying, save our jobs and so on. I'm very interested in these conflicts, these agonisms of the capitalist economy, where an entire town is actually obviously a beautiful waterfall. I made up the name, but beautiful waterfall and so on, and it's dying. So I'm interested in all these sorts of things, which are forgotten towns, forgotten constituencies, people who live in smaller areas and one company towns and so on. Maybe I'll just show you this one because it is. So I'll just read you this. This is like from a necrology work I did, and interested in these kind of something that's true. So Monument Lab's very interested in peeling back the fictions, kind of fictional layers, right, to what is true. So in this work here, which is written in the style of 19th century language, which took a lot of practice, believe me. The most unfortunate case of Lucy Chono Santos, convicted of smuggling heroin into Indonesia, whose mistake was to fall victim to a phony employment recruiter who fronted for an international drug gang and later threatened to kill Lucy's family if she refused to do as the gang demanded. Follow her story from growing up in a shanty on the edge of Manila, where she supported her parents and siblings by retrieving value from garbage, to bearing a child at a tender age, of whom she was separated for several years as she sat on death row awaiting execution by firing squad, passing her days in a squalid and overcrowded prison. To this is offered the particularities of her finality, including the many press stories, legal and diplomatic documents, and the many affecting and heartrending letters to her son, written a short time prior to her demise, all pressed from the originals of her own handwriting. So I'm really kind of, and this is not a true story, but it has truth in it, and it's a kind of compilation, distillation of things I've encountered when I was living in Sharjah, for example, and I read some horrible stories about Filipino workers there and their mistreatment and even their execution and so on. So I'm interested in these kind of underlying stories, and well, and here's I'll just show you this last one. This is a work that's being made, actually. This is a mirror, so, right? It's hard to represent a mirror, so that's why it has to be a mock-up. And this is a beautiful landscape, which is printed in high resolution ink onto the mirror. This is about 2 meters by 2 meters. And this is the landscape of Little Bighorn, or General Cal Custer's last stand, right? And so, I'm always interested in history. I'm interested in subjectivities. I'm interested in forgotten, truth and so on. So that's how they connect with my interest in monuments. I'm interested in space as well, right? The space of civility, the space, the idea of a polity, the ideal urban space, and so on.
I know you actually partnered or participated in architectural teams to work on architectural projects, one in Toronto, one in Edmonton, a bridge project in Edmonton. I was wondering about sort of like your interest in kind of this like social space and how in those kinds of projects where they're more formal architectures and not kind of artistic inspired projects, are you able to sort of bring these sort of ideas about justice, social justice and social and spatial justice together in those kinds of projects?
Well, I mean, it's a different can of worms, because it's much more client oriented, right? I'm not so client oriented when you're in art, but I do try to bring in shifts. I think it's important for artists to be involved in infrastructure projects. I always accept when it's possible. The other advantage, of course, is that they charge by the hour, and it's a kind of amazing. So I remember like doing one. Maybe I shouldn't say this. And they said, "How much do you charge for per hour?" I said, "An hour? I don't charge anything by an hour." Right? And they said, "Come on, well, how much do you charge?" Right? And I said, $50. And then they kind of looked at each other, the architect with the other city guy. They said, "Okay, how about 200? Is 200 okay?" I had no idea. And then, of course, I went back to my hotel and I went, if they're offering me 200 so easily, what are they making per hour? And so on. But I think it's really important, right? I mean, one of the ironies is that in Edmonton, I came up with a proposal called the Buffalo and the Buffalo Fur Trader, right? And it was supposed to be sited on either end of this new bridge called the Walterdale Bridge across the North Saskatchewan River. They built a kind of arcing passerelle pedestrian bridge attached to the vehicular bridge. And the idea was that as you cross from one side to the other side, because as you know, Edmonton is bifurcated north-south between Strathcona, or formerly Strathcona, and downtown Edmonton. And then you would, on one way, you'd see this, and a statue. It's not a statue, but it's of a man and a mustache and hatted, and perched atop a pile of buffalo pelts. It's a very famous picture. During the height of the destruction of the bison and so on. And and I wanted the guy to basically symbolize what's still going on, the rapaciousness of nature, for money, of human exploitation for money, and so on. And then on the other side would be the wisdom, the sagacious knowledge that's offered by Native people, by the buffalo. And they look at each other. The buffalo stands on a high rock, and the man sits a pile of pelts. I went through every engagement process, neighborhood engagement with every Native group the city told me to see. Everything went fine, right? But then recently, for whatever reasons, they said, we fear that this work will be misrecognized and misread as colonial. And I said, how so? And they said, well, you understand. I said, no, I don't understand. And so even more recently, I received a letter saying, the city is not proceeding with the installation of your work. So it's sitting rotting in some outdoor storage, several $100,000.
We have a couple of questions here.
Sure.
One from Terry. Ken, the development process you employed for Monument Lab makes me think of David Simon's creative process, especially for Treme, his love letter to New Orleans. In terms of engaging the community and erasing some of the artificial divisions between creative professionals and the people, characters, and stories they are realizing. Has this project engaged any TV, film, or live theater creators in terms of translating the experience or learnings into narrative forms for popular media? It is clearly ripe for the kinds of stories that really take flight in the public imagination.
Well, what we did get was contacted by Vice Media, and they want to do a whole series of Monument Lab. And so we're working on that right now, where we, either Paul or myself will go to a different city and we'll obviously have prep done before going to that city, and then like visiting, like in Decatur, Mississippi, for example, and visiting where the three Jewish freedom fighters were murdered, before Selma, Alabama, and so on. So happened, and and talk about monuments there. So this, you know, we didn't pitch it. It was Vice Media who contacted us about having a show about this. And I did great. So and we've done lots of podcasts, webinars, and you know, interviews on in the Washington Post, and New Yorker magazine did a huge, you know, 15-page profile.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So we have another question. This is from Andrew. Building on these ideas, I'm curious. Oh, this is about the Maple Falls piece. Building on these ideas, I'm curious as to your thoughts on the relationship between problematic monuments and problematic etymology of place names, and how these things are related or where they differ.
Well, they are related because they're both problematic. For one. I mean, I often cite the story of you know, the schools I went to. You know, Admiral Seymour, Lord Selkirk, you know, Prime Minister Gladstone. All three are, you know, problematic Brits. You know, let's put it that way. You know, and Admiral Seymour, for example, I went to, and you know, I grew up near Chinatown, and it's just east of Chinatown, this school. And you know, at the time, it was probably about 60% Cantonese Chinese children. You know, another 20% were native, but about 60% Cantonese Chinese children, right? Because at that time, the Chinese diaspora was mostly Cantonese, Southern Chinese. And so I remember, you know, in my teen years, long after leaving Admiral Seymour, because of elementary school, I decided one day I should research who Admiral Seymour is. I don't know why. And it turns out he was a lieutenant, so to speak, you know, right-hand man of Lord Elgin in the defeat of China in the Opium War. He was instrumental in the prosecuting of the bombardment of Canton Harbor in the Opium War, right? And so I'm going, wow, okay, I went to this school named Admiral Seymour, 60% were Cantonese children, and this is the guy that basically bombed and killed a lot of Cantonese in the Opium War. You know, so it's just, you know, I think we should know about these things. Mm-hmm. You know, children should know about these things. Adults should know about these things. So in a way, they overlap greatly. There's a lot of cities that don't have a lot of monuments or statuary, for example, like Los Angeles. We work with Los Angeles, but there they have a lot of problematic names, you know, and they also have a lot of erasures of sites. Just take a look at San Diego, Chicano Park, right? Why did Chicano Park come about? It exists underneath an expressway because the Chicano neighborhood that was there historically was torn down to extend an expressway. And so they made a park of the space underneath. It's noisy because there's cars above and so on, right? So these sorts of things, or even Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles, you know, that was it was a Chicano neighborhood, right? Cities often will, in the name of putting up stadiums or renovating an area, like Vancouver, right? They wanted to extend the freeway through Chinatown one time, right? They started doing it, and they took out Hogan's Alley, the only black area of Vancouver, right? And that's Afriqueville in Halifax. I mean, that's so, you know, a lot of places have problematic names. McGill University. McGill was like a slave owner, you know, so these things need to be known and discussed.
I like the idea of, you know, that you talked a bit about the need for conversation and dialogue before they change so that we don't lose the memory, right? So it's a different kind of remembering.
No, I think it should be front and center of public education. I'm not talking about, you know, overemphasizing, over-determining histories to the point whereby it becomes a little bit exaggerated, right? And like a hammer to a nail. I'm speaking about things that, you know, are true. But I also think another problem in terms of the statuary or monument, problematic monument out there is that there's a dearth of monuments that recognize the underrepresented.
Right.
Right. So you have lots of Confederate monuments, and let's just take aside the Confederate monuments. Let's just say that they've all been banished. You still have tons of business types, tons of white men, tons of equestrian monuments, but you have very few monuments, you know, despite the enormity of of the slave enterprise, you have very few monuments to the auction blocks, to the nooses where they did hanging of African Americans. I mean, that type of example. Or what about in Canada with the First Nations and Indigenous peoples? You know, where are the monuments to the children who died in residential schools? Where are these monuments? There's such a kind of disequilibrium in terms of the monuments and statuary inventory that's there, and the kind of absence of depiction of the traumatic histories that are embodied by the dominant history.
And then I think we start to, like your question about what is a monument, you know, like residential schools, like the Woodland Cultural Center, the site of the Mohawk Residential School becomes, you know, the building itself becomes a monument, right? Like architecture is monument in some ways. That's, you know, their project called Save the Evidence, right, is to actually protect the structure itself and what was in it, basically. To create a site.
But that's only one part of the what needs to be done. Of course, it should be saved because we should remember those things, right? But it should also be part of a larger package of you know, public education, genuine seeking of dialogue with First Nations and Aboriginal peoples, genuine. Right? I mean, since Harper's apology, I can't say that the conditions of Native life has advanced all that much. You know, it's still, I mean, look at all this, look at all the terrible things. I follow Canada all the time. The Native chief in northern Alberta who's beaten up, the wife was beaten up, right, by the RCMP, or what happened in Montreal, in Quebec, in the hospital, right, another Native woman. You know, there's so many stories. It's, you know, it's unbelievable. And this is I'm only speaking about the last 3 months.
Yeah.
You know, so.
No, exactly.
I think once we reconcile all these, we will never be fully reconciled, but once we start addressing these things, then, you know, things are, you know, the nation becomes richer. It doesn't become poor. We're not taking away anything. We're not taking away the, you know, histories and so on. We're saying there needs to be better balance.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the key point, right? I think that's what Monument Lab is doing so well. There's a thank you here from Brian Dietrich. Thanks, Ken Lum, for your presentation on Monument Lab and insights on civic landscapes and architecture. I'd like to thank you too. I think Monument Lab and your work is so inspiring. And this conversation has been very inspiring too. John, do you have any further questions?
Oh, there's lots of possible potential questions, but I'll leave it at that. I think it's been a very good presentation. It's great to see you again, Ken, and see what you're doing.
Thanks, Ken, and thank you, John, for joining us. And I think just you know, really important ideas we're leaving with about official and non-official memory and what's possible. I think Monument Lab just gives us a sense of what is possible and the scale it's possible at. I think that's, you know, a tremendous achievement, and really appreciate you joining us this evening.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Take care, everyone. Have a good night, and thank you to our audience for joining us as well.